Welcome to the Faith Focused Free Thinking Podcast, a ministry of Ozaki Congregational Church in Grafton, Wisconsin. This is our 20th episode, and we're glad you're with us. Hello, my name is Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us here at the Faith Focused Free Thinking Podcast. I feel like I need to keep apologizing for taking so long to get these episodes out. I'm still shooting for the first week of the month, but sometimes it just takes a few extra days. So today you're going to hear my conversation with a friend of mine named Josh Wheeler. Josh and I and our families have known one another for 5 or 6 years now here in Cedarburg, and Josh is a great guy, and I really appreciate him. And he and I have walked sort of a similar journey in terms of our perspective on life and faith and God and Bible, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing his story. And then we get into a little theological back and forth, and Josh asks me a number of questions, and so I hope you'll enjoy our discussion. So here is Josh Wheeler. I was debating, like, do I say that this is the second time that we've recorded this?
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the mic set up well the first time. So anyways.
This is a dry run.
Yeah, right. This is my good friend, Josh Wheeler, and you're going to enjoy hearing from him and his story, and we're going to just talk about some things, and we'll hear from him a little bit, and maybe we'll get into some theological questions and kind of thing, and so that's great. So tell us who you are and where you are in life and your family and all of that.
Yeah, I'm Josh Wheeler. I'm from Michigan originally, and my wife and I have 4 kids. We live in Cedarburg now. We've been in Cedarburg going on 8 years, been in Wisconsin about 10. We bounced around. We were in New York, Denver, Chicago, Michigan, so we've been kind of all over. Kids are ages 15 to 10, and we got to know you guys 6-7 years ago. Yeah.
And you work in finance.
I work in finance. Yep. That's what brought us here is my job, and I've been there going on 10 years. And
yep. And your wife Heidi is a
she's a nurse by training. She now teaches at Milwaukee School of Engineering. She teaches in the nursing program there.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Yes, we got connected, I think, through our kids, and also because we've sort of walked a similar journey in terms of
faith and church and all that.
Yes. Yes. So tell us. You grew up Catholic. Tell us a little bit about that.
Grew up Catholic. Mom and dad were Catholic. They raised us in the Catholic Church. We lived in a small town in Michigan, small church, but it was good. I had a good experience growing up Catholic, I guess I would say. But we were devout. Like, we would go every week. I was an altar boy. Did the sacraments there, First Communion and confirmation and all that. Went to confession fairly regularly. So that was my upbringing, and I'm thankful for it. It introduced me to the Christian faith. I'm still a Christian today, so it taught me the basics of Christianity. They stress, the catechism and the Catholic Church, and that was a big part of growing up, was going to classes and learning the basics of theology and all that stuff. So that was good. We had a good community at church. I think it was, the Catholic Church is such that you tend to go to the nearest Catholic church near you, and it's you have a wide mix of ages, which I think is a good thing that you might not otherwise get at some other churches where you attend more based on other reasons. But so we went with kids our age, and they're older people and everybody in between. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah.
No, that's great. Yes, like, community is such an important part of church, right? Yeah. And whatever tradition you're a part of, I mean, I think that's such a significant portion and a necessary portion, right? We all need community,
Yeah, and we, like I said, we moved around a bunch now in my adult life with my wife and my kids, and I feel like the church is always, whatever church we end up being a part of, that's always like the primary way that we connect to the community and make friends and stuff. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So grew up Catholic, but then you ended up going to Hope College.
Went to Hope College in Holland, Michigan, which is affiliated with the Christian Reformed Church, and at the time, and I think probably still, had a pretty vibrant worship atmosphere in a Christian Reformed sort of Protestant, pretty, I guess, evangelical setting there. That was the first time I'd really encountered that, coming from Catholicism, and I was pretty struck by it, and I thought it was really interesting. And I think up to that point, for me, my faith was kind of, it wasn't a real personal relationship with God kind of a thing. It was more like a list of rules and kind of to-dos and actually things you shouldn't do. And that was kind of, I think that was how I engaged with faith, a lot of things I shouldn't do. But I don't think it really had engaged my heart much up until that point in college. And so I saw people worshiping, singing these modern worship songs and hearing this modern preaching from a good preacher there. And I saw people kind of on fire for God. And I thought, wow, I want to be a part of that. So I kind of started to go down that path. I'm a pretty analytical person, and so I had to kind of figure out, well, what do they believe and what do I believe, and what are the differences and what makes sense. And so started to go down that path, reading books and trying to figure out, the theology of the Protestant side of faith and how does that differ from Catholicism and all that. So went down that path, did a lot of studying and reading, and kind of came out the other side and decided I think I'm Protestant now. And so I sort of switched, and then from that point on, from Hope on, we've always attended Protestant churches. I think much to the disappointment of my mother, who she's very devout Catholic and probably still prays for me to come back to the faith, but I think she's okay with it now, and we can talk about God and it's fine. And then I was pretty involved in music. So I got involved, I led worship here and there right after college and over the years. And so I kind of got embedded in some different churches. Was on staff at a church at one point, helping with leading worship. And so I kind of spent my 20s and some of my 30s really in evangelical churches.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I always like to say, I think each tradition has something to offer, right? Mm-hmm. And each tradition no tradition is perfect. And there's something for us to learn from every tradition, and every tradition has to evolve, right? And our friend Casey, of course, who's a pastor at a Catholic church, and I was talking with her, and she's saying just how the Catholic Church is beginning to emphasize Scripture in a way that it hasn't before, right? Yeah. And of course, Scripture is so emphasized within the Catholic or within the evangelical church, right? Yes. And the Catholic Church is also beginning to emphasize more extemporaneous prayer rather than sort of prayers by rote, And whereas I feel like in Protestantism or evangelicalism, there's a move back towards more liturgical prayers, right? Which it's like we're kind of coming to meet in the middle here. And I think that's great.
In my own life, I think about my years growing up as Catholic, and I think about how, for me at that point, I felt like I was kind of just going through the motions of faith. And I attribute that to the Catholic religion because that's what I was in the moment. But a Catholic Mass is very liturgical. You're reciting the exact same thing for a large part of the Mass every week. Which back then, it kind of I felt like I can just check my brain out and just say these words and it doesn't really mean anything. And again, I attribute that to the Catholic Church, but I think that was just as much my own stance. I mean, I'm a young kid, a lot of kids don't care about religion or God. So I think I want to be careful to not sort of call that out as a deficiency of the Catholic Church or my Catholic upbringing or something. I think that was as much my own, my own interest or lack thereof in Christianity at that point than it was anything else.
Yeah. No, interesting. Yeah, I mean, just to tie that up too. I mean, I feel like, it's so interesting. We've got people in our church here at OCC that used to be Catholic or kind of came out of the Catholic Church, just like you did, right? And then sort of went to a more Protestant expression of faith. And then I've got friends who I grew up with in the evangelical church who have now become Catholic.
Yeah.
Right? And again, no tradition perfect, and every tradition needs to evolve and evaluate itself. And yet people find a home and community and God in a variety of places. And that's okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you're into the evangelical church through Hope College, and then, you're worship pastor for a while and kind of thing. And then sort of some threads start to unravel for you within the evangelical church, or that thought. Yeah,
there are a few different threads that in my kind of mid-30s, I'm 46 now, so in my mid-30s, started to have questions that I didn't feel like I had great answers to in my own theological makeup. And the threads that I was playing at, so one was we were in Kalamazoo, Michigan at the time, and I noticed a lot of like any medium to larger city in the U.S., kind of this urban blight and poverty and segregation. And I just kind of got because I was seeing it so closely on a day-to-day basis. I just got interested in it and thought, what's the history here of race and racism, and why are things the way they are? And kind of started to just do some study. And they had some community conversations, I remember, that some organization put on in Kalamazoo. So I would attend those and listen to people of different race than me talk about their experience and how different it was and how problematic and some of the issues they had and all this stuff. And I started to kind of think about these ideas and talk about them, and I felt like the posture of the church I was in, not necessarily my church, but just the broader evangelical church in general, was just didn't seem to care very much, or had these kind of simplistic responses or answers to the problems that I did not think were consistent with the idea of Christian love and justice. And if you read through the Bible, there's so much about God being interested in justice and concern for the poor and the marginalized, and I just didn't feel like that was represented in what I was seeing in the evangelical church, and so that bothered me. I think there was a point where I had read through the Bible a few times in my adult life, but I was doing it again at one point and got to some stuff in the Old Testament, classic questions that people have asked for ages about God's wrath and some of the violence and some of the judgment and I guess it hit me in ways that it hadn't hit me in years past. And I thought, the way that I used to think about my answers to these questions is not working anymore. That was a thread. There was some of it in watching kind of politics and how, Trump came to power, and I'm not super anti-Trump or super for Trump, but just watching the church kind of get behind him in this very substantial way, it felt to me uncritical, and I remember the days when Bill Clinton was being sort of, really reprimanded by the church for his personal moral failings and how character mattered at that point. And then I remember seeing and then watching kind of how the church responded to Trump, and it just felt inconsistent. And it felt to me like, okay, the church's response to these things feels very tribal. It feels a lot less like seeking God's guidance and all this stuff, and a lot more just like holding on to power or being tribal or acting out of fear. Those are probably overly simplistic and not entirely fair characterizations, but for me, those were the threads that made me kind of question, whether the evangelical church was a good fit for me, I guess. So went through, I guess, what you call deconstruction, right? That's the popular term for that these days. So I had my little deconstruction phase, and so again did a lot of reading, for me, again, approaching everything analytically, and just started to engage with other ways of looking at the Bible, other ways of looking at faith. And I think I came out on the other side of that sort of feeling like the evangelical church is not the best fit for me at this point. And some of the things that I was focused on were, it felt like the churches I had been in through that point had been very focused on correct doctrine, right doctrine, right thinking, and that always appealed to me as someone who's analytical. I always wanted to kind of have all my T's crossed, my I's dotted when it came to my theology. But the more I kind of thought about it and studied it, the more I realized that there's not, the Bible is just not as clear on a lot of this stuff as some people make it out to be, And I feel like if God really wanted to make all of these things super clear, he could have gone about it in a much different way than what we have. And just look at how many, schisms have happened and how many different churches we have now just within the Protestant faith, that all the different sects that have broken off and said, we can't stay with this one because we think differently, and so we're going to do this, and then another one doesn't, and another one doesn't. And so I've gotten to the point, I think, where I've let a lot of those, to me, tertiary and secondary issues go. And I'm still a professing Christian. I think, I would profess the Apostles' Creed and believe in the core tenets of the Christian faith. But, there's a lot of theological issues now that I'm comfortable saying I don't know, and I don't need to know, and I'm never going to know.
Yeah.
And some of the churches I've been a part of in the past, I felt like you had to have all those answers, that you had to think the right way about all these different things. It was sort of correct doctrine and this focus on personal piety, and those are like the most important things. And I feel like there's more to having a relationship with God and being in the church than that. And so we kind of bounced around and left church we were part of, and we're at a church now. We're at Christ Church in Mequon, which I don't know, maybe some people would consider that an evangelical church, but for us it's been a good landing place where we feel like that. I don't know. I feel like it's a good fit.
Yeah. No, all that is great. It's so interesting. I think, there's a lot to think about there. But, to me, and we'll get into this a little bit, like, as I've always said, I experienced the very best of the evangelical church growing up, and it was such a positive experience. All the people, we're all doing our best, right? Nobody has it exactly right, kind of thing, But I feel like the prevailing sort of message within the evangelical church, just as you said, right, is you got to get your theology right, and then you got to act in a certain way, right? Yeah. And what it creates is an us versus them deal, right? Yeah. This tribalism kind of thing, and where it's we've got the truth and other people don't, or we're saved and other people are lost, or we're going to heaven and other people are going to hell, and then that just spills over into other things that become sort of very black and white, or in and out, or us and them, whether it's race or politics or whatever, and us being less certain is, I think, a helpful thing. I think that's a question the evangelical church has got to ask. Is correct belief more important than love, joy, and peace? And
it almost felt like in some of those churches that the way they're operating is that when you die and get to the end of your life, God's going to give you a written test of doctrine, and you're going to have to score, X% to make it to heaven.
Right.
And I just don't think that's it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that us versus them mentality you're talking about, I definitely felt that. And I felt that my worldview when I was more in the evangelical church was, I think in the back of my mind, or sometimes in the front of my mind, everyone I would see, I'd have this in this category of like, oh, there's someone who's going to heaven like I am, and there's someone who's not. Shoot, they're not. They don't believe the right stuff, so they're not. And I feel like it put this unnecessary barrier between me and the and other people around me. That's not helpful. Yeah, and I think to me that was sort of that tribalism, that us versus them, is kind of deeply embedded. It felt deeply embedded in a lot of those churches, and I think it comes from this idea of being in the world but not of the world, being the world is a dark and evil place, and we're part of the elect and the chosen. And I don't know, I don't, that's not my framework anymore, and I feel like that has released this tension that's allowed me to just be in better harmony with the people around me, whatever their worldview is, whatever their beliefs are.
Yep. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's been my experience too.
Yeah.
And I had one friend who told me, who's also sort of deconstructed. He's more left some things behind or whatever. But he said, I feel like the greatest benefit is I don't have to be afraid of people anymore, or right?
That's a good way of saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. You only trust people within your tribe, and other people outside your tribe are not to be trusted, right? Or are to be feared.
Right.
And there's yeah. I mean, I felt like
and you and I have talked a lot about kind of the different views of the afterlife, and you describe universalism, right? What is the phrase that you use that I always forget? That's
ultimate redemption. Just God will ultimately redeem everybody.
Ultimate redemption. You like that better, right, than universalism?
Well, just because universalism is, particularly within the evangelical church, has so many stigmatisms attached to it, or stereotypes.
It's a bad word. Yeah,
it's a bad word, right? It's it's outside of evangelical thought or whatever, and you can mean a lot of different things by the word universalism, kind of thing. But
gotcha.
So maybe
ultimate redemption. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that. And of course, in the evangelical world, it's some version of eternal conscious torment, right? There's a hell, and most people today and most people in history that have ever lived are going to hell,
right? Right.
And in eternal conscious torment, I don't believe that anymore. Like I've told you before, I'm not really a full universalist. I think I'm a hopeful universalist. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, what God's going to do. I don't have to make that call. That's up to Him. I hope that He redeems everybody. And I used to rack my brain about that. I've read a ton of stuff, the David Bentley Hart books, and Thomas Talbot. He wrote the 1,000-page book examining every piece of scripture about the afterlife, about heaven and hell, and he sort of came. I think he is a universalist, right? But I think he says in the book, like, to me anyway, it came out to be sort of perfectly inconclusive. Like you can stack up verses on both sides. That God's desires to save everyone, His love is for the whole world, all this stuff, versus stuff that looks more exclusionary, and you can almost it almost looks like you can have the same amount stacked on both sides. So I don't know what it looks like, but I have a real hard time with getting to eternal conscious torment.
Yeah.
And there's annihilationism and whatever, blackness, cease to exist. Who knows? But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all of that, like, and we've talked about this before. I find myself in all of that sort of less interested in that discussion even.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and because like Thomas Talbot or that book, there are people that are trying to say, what does the Bible say about this? What does the Bible teach?
Yeah.
As though the Bible's teaching on this particular issue is really, really important. We want to kind of get it right. And like, I find myself not worried or not needing to make sure I figure out what the Bible says on this particular or that particular issue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And maybe we'll ask that question, what is the Bible? But I want to ask you this. We sort of talked about it last time too or whatever, but like I'm a convinced universalist, not a hopeful universalist, a convinced universalist, because I think if I'm going to be convinced that God is going to save me, well, then I'm going to be convinced that God is going to save everybody.
Yeah.
And if I'm only going to be hopeful, if I'm going to say, well, maybe God is not going to save me either, well, then okay, then I can say might not save anybody, whatever. For me, I just think
Yeah.
if I'm gonna be certain about myself, well, then I'm gonna be certain about anybody or everybody, right?
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that in your mind related to your own salvation and the salvation of the world?
I know that's a framework. I've heard you talk about that a lot, and that's a framework that I haven't really. Doesn't land as much for me. It makes sense what you're saying, but I think it's because I think about it more. What's the category of salvation to God? Is it like the whole world, or is it going to be individually chosen? Like is God saving the whole world, or is He going to go person by person and assess them and look at their lives and what they believed and whatever? To me, those are kind of the two categories. And then if it's the latter, then yeah, who knows? I don't know if I make the cut or not, but if I'm a hopeful universalist, I'm hopeful that it's not that it's God's intent is to redeem the whole world, and we all fall in that category.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that we've talked about this, necessarily, but like I feel like for myself now, like when I first let go of hell, and hey, God is going to redeem it all. And all of that. Then I was initially, okay, what does the Bible say about, can I make the Bible teach universalism? Now today I find myself, I take what's good from the Bible and what's helpful,
Yeah.
and not worry about what is not. And
Right.
I find it as a sort of a source of God's revelation to us in the way that so many other things are a source of God's revelation to us. But I kind of start with the question, not who is God and how do I do what God wants me to do, but I start with the question, what does it mean to be human? And what's the best way to approach life? And what's the best framework from which to approach life?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for me, I find that the best framework is a trust in a good, loving God who loves me and who loves everybody and who's going to redeem the suffering in the world. And it gives me a hope for myself and for the world. It gives me an identity and a purpose, who I am and what I'm in the world to do. And it gives me a freedom from fear, all of that. You see what I'm saying? From the question we're trying to answer.
Right. Yeah, no, it's good. It sounds, as an analytical person, to me that sounds too like you're making up your own thing. So that framework for me doesn't really work, because it's like, well, we could all sort of, reality is what it is despite what we want it to be. So if I devise my own God or my own principles for what the universe should look like, that's great, but it has no bearing on reality. So I feel like I have to go to a source outside myself to understand objective reality. And so I still go back to the Bible. To me, the Bible is still the authoritative word of God. But what was helpful for me when I was kind of coming out of my very skeptical phase was to start with Jesus and start with the story of Jesus, kind of start there, as opposed to, I was getting all hung up in the Old Testament and, did creation happen in 6 little days, or it doesn't seem like historically, scientifically, that we can make the case for a lot of things that are in the Old Testament. And that was really kind of a problem for me. But I sort of, when I let all that go and let go of a more literal kind of flat reading of the Bible and encountered, different theologians and thinkers over the centuries that have thought about it in a different way, then that really sort of released me to be able to engage with it intellectually in a way that made sense. But for me, starting with Jesus as the incarnation of God and the perfect image of God, and then to me that's sort of the most important part of the Christian story in the Bible. And then from there, I feel like there's flexibility to how you're going to think about the rest of what's in the Bible.
Yeah.
But I know for you, you've talked about how you're happy to like admit that, I believe what I believe because I want to believe it, and so to start with my beliefs, and then I'll fit the Bible to it. Is that fair? And
well, yes. I mean, but because I feel like yes, we're making stuff up, or I'm making stuff up. I mean, I'm making God in the way that I want him to be. But I would argue that we're all doing that.
We're all doing that,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, whether we want to admit it or not. And I always, the discussion of objective truth, which you hear in the evangelical world all the time, I feel. And I always want to say, okay, that's okay. If you want to ground objective truth in who God is, that's fine. But the minute you say you know what is objectively true, the only thing you're doing is what everybody else is doing. The only things we have are our inner sense of what is right and wrong, or whatever, or we have our collective agreement and experience as humanity.
Right.
I mean, that's all we have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you have some ancient document that you consider to be divine, and you're going to kind of appeal to that, right? And people will always say, well, so do you believe that Hitler was objectively wrong to do what he did? And I would say, well, yeah, he was objectively wrong because we agree that he was objectively wrong. I mean, we don't kind of have anything else, right? But let's not use such an extreme example. Would you would you say that objectively right, or whatever, that marriage is only between a man and a woman?
Whew.
You know what I mean? Well, the evangelical, whoever believing that to be objectively true, is going to have a harder time to defend that, because other people are going to see it differently based on their inner sense and our collective agreement and experience.
Yeah.
And the only way that the evangelical or whoever is going to defend that is by appealing to some ancient document that they consider to be the Word of God. And then we've got to ask the question, well, what is the Bible? And can we look at the Bible as a source of objective truth? So we're all doing the same thing. We're all appealing to the same thing. And the only other thing I would say about that is our collective agreement and experience and our inner sense are all subjective.
Yeah. I do think I've always thought that's kind of an inherent contradiction in the sort of the Reformation and the split from the Catholic Church and Martin Luther's whole thing. And because his whole appeal was to Scripture alone, we've got to let go of the tradition of the church. It's just you and your Bible. God will reveal the objective truth to you through your understanding of the Bible. But again, the Bible's not clear about a lot of things. And so everybody's got their own interpretation of the same Bible. It's been interpreted a million different ways, and that's why we have all the different, breakoffs of religion. So to me, the evidence is clear that God, if God really was concerned that we were super clear on every piece of doctrine, like I said to you before, he could just drop this manual into all of our laps. He can do whatever he wants. This manual that's very clearly written, it's short, it's concise, it's updated in your language and with modern references, and says this is what you should believe about all these things. Boom, done. But no, we've got this, we got this book that's been compiled over many years, written by many people in different languages, and the interpretations are hard. And so I don't feel like it matters to try to figure out all the little details of every little piece of theology.
Yes. Well, and the other thing I feel like, like you say, I'm sort of making it up, right? I think we're all making it up, and somebody will say to, hey, well, just because you want it to be true doesn't mean it is, right?
Yep.
I mean, just because I want God to save everybody doesn't mean, and the thing with that is it goes both ways. Just because somebody wants Hitler to go to hell for all eternity doesn't mean he is, right? Or just because God, or somebody wants God not to exist or God to exist or whatever.
Right.
It doesn't, that argument goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what is objective reality? I mean, we've discovered certain things, but at the end of the day, we are living under a blanket of mystery and all doing our best to navigate life in a positive way and to find hope and to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and yet I've heard you say a lot that the story of Jesus gives you great hope, right? Mm-hmm. And where do we get that person in that story? It's from the Bible, right? That's
right.
That's the vast majority, the primary source of the information that we're getting about. So it's still, for you, the Bible is still like a significant source of truth, but you are comfortable sort of picking and choosing what you think is important from the Bible. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And to me, that I guess that there's a little bit of a contradiction there in that the person story of Jesus from the Bible still holds great significance for you, but that's where it comes from, is the Bible, and yet something else in the Bible that you might pull is like, you might say, well, that doesn't matter, or that's not helpful, or whatever.
Yeah.
I have a harder time, like, that's why I spent so long trying to reconcile everything that was in the Bible, even the stuff that seemed contradictory or unclear or wrong. Because to me, it doesn't hold that you can take certain parts but not others. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And yet, I mean, even though you would say I'm picking and choosing, I mean, you would acknowledge that you're picking and choosing, right? The way you could say it is, you've watched the movie Hellbound?
Yeah, it's documentary, right?
Yeah, documentary.
Yeah.
And at one point, Dr. Jerry Walls, who was a professor at Houston Christian University, I think, anyways, but he talks about, hey, look, there are parts of the Bible that seem to suggest that God is going to save everybody, for example. And there are parts of the Bible that seem to suggest that God is going to condemn some people to eternal damnation. And whatever you do, however you interpret the Bible, you've got to make certain seemingly contradictory passages line up with one another. And you're going to take certain passages and make them authoritative and make others subservient to those, right? Or you're going to go the other way.
Yeah.
And so we're all picking and choosing which passages we choose to be authoritative and how we interpret. I mean, this is the,
Yeah. No, I agree with that, because, I mean, like we said with Thomas Talbot, he's got all the universal sounding ones and all the eternal conscious torment ones and whatever else. And they look pretty equal, and so.
Yeah.
But some people's going to come down real hard on one side and some the other, and you got to make the other ones fit. And so, yeah, and again, that just gets back to to me, the Bible's not very clear, and it doesn't seem that God necessarily cares that it's all that clear in a lot of these areas.
Yeah. So then my point, or I would say that I'm not worried about making it fit.
Yeah.
Whatever. I take from the story of Jesus what is helpful, what it represents to me. Like I think I've said before, like I find myself not saying anymore, I believe in Jesus. What I say instead is I find hope in what the person and story of Jesus represents to me.
So I know we've talked about this, but so for you, is it important that Jesus actually lived and died and rose? 100%, it really happened. It's historical. Does that?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's an important thing, because in the evangelical church, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important that is 10, right?
Yeah,
It's at 11. Like, it has to have happened.
Yeah.
And I just think, I just cannot believe that what God is requiring us to do is sift through all the evidence for the historicity of the person and life and death and resurrection of Jesus and be convinced of it and believe in it. I mean, there's not enough evidence, or it's not compelling enough or convincing enough. And two, for people to be exposed to it in the chaos of life, I just can't imagine that this is what God is requiring of people.
Yeah.
And requiring it of them to the tune of eternal conscious torment. I mean, this is what the evangelical will say. So for me, I just say, I find hope in what the person and story of Jesus represents to me, and I'm just not worried about its historicity.
Yeah.
Historicity.
Right.
So, but you would say, though, the historicity is important to you.
I mean, I certainly get the argument that you're making. For me, it still is important. But I guess would tie that back to what we were saying about the Bible, because the Bible certainly reads as though this really happened, right? Like, it's hard to read the Gospels and come away thinking they're happy for you to think that this is just kind of a made up story. But you're saying you can view it as sort of this myth or this story, and it still holds the exact same or just as powerful of a message and conveys just as much of truth about who God is, whether it was a made up story or whether it really happened.
Yes, I would say that. And I think that's a good point. I mean, it's a good point that I think the Bible reads as though it happened, right? That this is, people are reporting on what they saw.
Right.
And I think that's
As
helpful.
opposed to, I feel like there's stuff in the Old Testament, some of the stories that they almost read like they're like the author's fine with them being fine with you understanding that this is just a story that I'm writing. But,
Yes, sure.
But it doesn't dilute it all from the truth that I'm trying to convey.
Yes.
Whereas the Gospels, to me, they seem like they're written in ways like, here's a firsthand account of what happened.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, it's different than the Bible is different than Jesus telling a parable, saying, "Hey, nobody listening to Jesus really thought that there actually was a good Samaritan or whatever kind of thing."
Yep,
You know what I mean? At the same time, I feel like here we have this book that's recounting events that happened 2,000 years ago. I mean, we are never going to arrive at certainty about, yes, these actually happened and in this particular way. And just like you say, right, I mean, if that's what God wanted us to have,
Would have gone about it much different.
he would have gone about it much different. God could have convinced us that this actually happened or given us sufficient evidence, and obviously he's chosen not to.
So I guess in your mind, why does that not dilute it for you? Why do I know that they're telling me this really had to happen and I need to believe this in order for this to be true. I disagree with that, yet I still hold on to the hope of the truth that they convey, despite me not going along with the basis of their presentation of it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
How do you do that in your mind?
I don't know. Partly because, like, I feel like I don't have anything else, right? I mean, the Bible and the person and story of Jesus, certainly in Western culture, I mean, this has been the story that we have rallied around, right? The love of God demonstrated to us, a God who would become one of us, then sacrifice himself on our behalf, rise from the dead to defeat the power of death, give us hope of eternal life, right? I mean, this is the story we have rallied around.
So the ardent intellectual atheist would hear that, I think, and just go, well, he's basically just admitting that he needs it to be true, otherwise he's going to spin out into despair. That's not a convincing argument. The ardent intellectual atheist who's trying to assess whether the Bible is true, or the Bible contains information on which you should base your life. You're saying, didn't necessarily need to happen, but I just need it to be true for me. I need the truth of it, the message about God to be powerful, or else I don't know what else to have hope in.
Well, sure. Okay. No. Yes, great point. I would say, however anybody else makes peace with the world and how anybody else finds a way to navigate the world positively, and to give themselves hope and peace and whatever, that's great. The atheist makes peace with the belief that there is no God and that this life is all there is. And anybody who makes peace, that's great. For me, I find peace, it makes a difference in my life to embrace what I see the person and story of Jesus representing. The love of God and that God is ultimately going to redeem the world and the victory over death and kind of stuff and the meaning and purpose in that. And I can see how people make peace with atheism, but growing up in a Christian church in a real positive environment, I mean, that's what it has represented to me, and I continue to hold on to it. And I'm just not that worried whether or not it's actually true.
Well, and we talked about it before, but you, whether or not events took place as they were described in the Bible, you believe in that there's a God. You believe there's a higher power. You believe there's a God that loves us and that's going to redeem us.
Yes.
You believe that's literally true.
Yes.
I think. And so, in other words, whether or not Jesus died and rose to save us from our sins, whether or not that was the mechanism, the action behind it of there being a God that will redeem us all is true.
Yes.
It was conveyed via this story of Jesus and the cross in the Bible. That's great. Whether or not that's literally true, that doesn't necessarily matter because the God and the salvation behind it is there.
Yes.
Is that accurate for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and it's interesting too because I don't want to say to, and tell me what you think about this, right? But like for the Muslim who's following his or her religion and finding peace there, that's
Yeah.
great. Like, I'm not saying to the Muslim, hey, you're wrong and I'm right, but I think Jesus is going to save you anyways. Like,
Yeah.
I think the work of Christ applies to everybody, and this is the mechanism. It has to be the historical life and person of Christ, or whatever, but it applies to you too. So your religion, it's really sort of wrong, and my religion is right. But don't worry, my religion is going to save you too.
Yeah.
I'm saying to the Muslim, hey, however you make sense and peace with the world, that's great. Yeah. And I think God is, you're not right and I'm not right. We're all living under the blanket of mystery and just trying to do our best to make sense out of life. And I think God is going to redeem it.
So the religion for you doesn't really matter. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, whatever else, that however you think about God saving you doesn't matter. God's gonna save you anyway. But I guess for the atheist who would tell you there's no God, you would still espouse to them, well, there is a God and He's going to save you.
Well, I would say, yeah, that's what makes sense to me. I know I've said this before or whatever, but to anybody in their belief system or lack of a belief system or whatever, I'd say, look, if the way that you understand the world and God is working for you, great.
Right. But in your mind, you're walking away going, God's saving that person too.
Yes. I mean, that's my perspective, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. And I always say, I like to say on Sunday morning too, it's not as though what we believe doesn't matter, right? I mean, what you believe about yourself and the world and God even, right, is going to make a difference in your life. And like I think the evangelical church, right, or they believe that God requires of us to believe certain things and requires us to act certain ways and to whatever. And what it results in is in them fearing the world, right, and fearing other people and having their tribe that they hold on to, this us and them. I mean, that's what it results in, kind of thing. And so anyways, I mean, we all need to evaluate the way that we look at the world and what it produces within us. You know what I mean? So, but I mean, for you,
go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, for you, how do you look at, the Muslim or somebody with a different belief system than your own?
Yeah. I find the way you're describing it sort of separating God's love and redemption from, I guess, the Christian mechanism that we find. I find that kind of compelling, but it doesn't make intellectual sense to me. So but at the same time, and I don't know enough about Islam to, have real strong opinions about that religion. But I think having stepped away from evangelicalism in my own faith, I don't feel the need to try to convince others to believe the way that I believe. And I feel like that's something I let go of that frankly I was never good at doing anyway. Not to say I feel like there's a passage somewhere that talks about you need to be able to represent to others why you have the hope that you do. And to me that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like when when people who don't believe as I do ask me about why I have hope, I can articulate that and tie it to my faith in God. But I don't feel the need to evangelize, I guess.
Yeah. No. I mean, like for me, I think evangelism is just, you want everyone to live with hope. You want everyone to live with meaning and purpose, right? A reason to live. And you want everyone to have a community. And I mean, I think what the church is here for is to be a community of people, to give people hope, to give people meaning and a purpose, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we all need that. Everybody needs that, whether you're an atheist or whatever. And so how do we represent that through the church and the love of God, the personal story of Jesus, right? To give people hope, kind of thing.
Do you feel like you have, I'm curious, why hope? I hear you talk about that a lot. I feel like that's kind of your banner is hope. Why do you think that is? What is it? I mean, hope's a great thing, obviously, but what, there's love, there's justice, there's charity, there's kindness. I feel like there's lots of good virtues that you could rally around. Why does hope feel like the the one for you that really kind of drives your motivation?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, I just think that unless you have something that's going to give you reason to, sort of get out of bed and do the things you do, sort of an underlying foundation or framework for life, then I find people are aimless, right? And I mean, people will find it in other places. If the atheist doesn't have hope for beyond this life, right? But would find how am I a beneficial presence to humanity and involved in the lives of people around me to better humanity and give hope for humanity's future, kind of thing. But for me, it's just, I think we all want to believe we're living for something, and we all want to believe that there's I don't know if we say we all want to believe, but that there's a meaning beyond just this world. Like, for me, I don't want to believe, one, that there is no redemption for the suffering in the world, and two, that ultimately, however many years in the future, the sun is going to explode and we were never here. None of this meant anything. I don't want to believe that. No. And I mean, again,
but I feel like I have heard atheists talk about how the fact that there's just blackness after we die means that nothing really matters. Like that test you're worried about, or the job, or like the tragedy you heard about, or none of this stuff. We're all going to be dead in a few years. No one's going to remember us, a few generations after that, whatever. Nothing really matters. Don't worry about anything. I feel like that there's a line of thinking there that some people take comfort in that.
Yeah. Well, and just like, I mean, the atheist would take comfort in that, and then the real staunch Calvinist would take comfort in nothing really matters because every dot and tittle was ordained by God.
Yeah.
Nothing, it's all scripted, every minute detail. And so,
right.
Whatever, don't worry about it. God has got it, you know what I mean? Again, however people make sense of the world, that's okay. But for the atheist who says, well, yeah, it doesn't really matter, I'm just like, okay, I mean, I get it, great. But for me, it's easy to say that when we're sitting in a nice, comfortable room and have all we need. I just find that tougher for just the horrible suffering of so many people around the world. Right. And to say that it doesn't matter, and I just can't find myself with just resignation, it's just the way the world is, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I want to believe that God is going to redeem the world.
Yeah. Yeah, who said he's put eternity in the hearts of men.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's easy to believe. It's easy to atheism is probably easier in the developed world when you're comfortable. It's probably a lot harder where life is really, really tough.
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back to one thing, and then I want to ask us one more question that I think would be good for us to discuss. But I want to circle back to this. And we talked about, of course, the Bible and the historicity of Christ and all of that. I mean, why is it important to you, or why do you feel like you want to hold on to the Bible as being the authoritative Word of God, and hold on to the historicity of the life and death and resurrection of Christ?
Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me without that. I need I need Jesus. I need the triune God. I need that to have happened because without him dying and rising, there's no evidence of there being a unique story there, a unique God that loves us and that has the power to redeem us all. Otherwise, for me, it's just another cool story that doesn't necessarily have bearing on reality.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say, or would you say that on a scale of 1 to 10, like the importance of the historicity of Christ or the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, like, are you still at a 10 there?
Yeah. I I don't know. I'm some very high number. I don't know if it's a 10.
Yeah.
But for you, it's the mechanism by which we're saved from the Bible, Jesus dying and rising. You don't need that, but you need the idea. You need God behind it. You need a God that loves us, and that's going to save us. But
Yes.
but the story that conveys that truth, that it can just be a story. You believe the truth behind it, regardless.
I mean, I think that's right. I think that's, although, like I would say, the story of Jesus represents that to me, right? And it's the only story I've ever known. I mean, not like, or the only story it's the story I grew up in, right? It is the story that has represented that. I mean, the idea of God as Trinity, which, God is relational, right? Which explains why we're relational. And that God puts himself in our shoes. God understands what it's like to be us. And
Right.
And God defeats the power of death, the human condition, by rising from the dead, kind of thing. You know what I mean? But no, I think you're right that.
I'm trying to strip it down for you. What is the core of what you need to be true, to maintain your faith and your hope?
Yeah.
And I think you need a higher power, right? You need God.
Yeah.
And he needs to love us. God is love and loves us.
Yeah.
And maybe that's it. But you're saying he also God's relational. He knew what it was like to be in our shoes, and he saved us from death, from our sin.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I mean, like, if
God is love. That's like a core Christian tenet. Maybe that's the essence of what you're holding on to. However that's expressed, whatever.
Yeah.
Conveys that doesn't necessarily matter for you. It's just God is love.
Right. No, I think that's accurate. God is love. And the story of Jesus is helpful, or whatever, but maybe all we need is God is love. And isn't this what 1 John tells us? God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him.
Yeah.
Right. And I think people obviously find hope and find community and find purpose and meaning and whatever in other places or in other traditions or with other stories, right? I guess, for me, I hold on to that God is love. And
you could take away the church, you could take away the Bible. As long as somehow that God is love was conveyed to you in a compelling way, that would do it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, not that you can take away the church and the Bible as elements of Christianity. I mean, the church is community, and I think how do we navigate the world in a positive way? Well, we all need community, and we all need hope, and we all need purpose, kind of thing. And and I think if you find a group, I think you're right. For me, you can summarize it all in that God is love. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. And you'd summarize it, God is love, but in the person of Christ.
Yeah, I think so. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I think about that. Yeah, not letting go of Jesus, I think.
Yeah. So not to push, but you would say the Muslim is saved through Jesus.
Yeah, I whoever's saved is saved through Jesus in some way.
Yeah.
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 I don't know what that looks like or how that happens, and I don't feel like I need to know that or understand it. But that's my hope, is that we're all redeemed through Jesus somehow.
Yeah. And maybe I would say the Muslim is saved through what Jesus represents to me. And maybe something else represents that to the Muslim.
Yeah.
It's God is love, whatever.
Right.
But yeah.
Right.
I think that, last thing or I want to cover too, we talked about before is how do you find yourself, and I feel like this is something I'm working on. How do you find yourself now relating to the evangelical church? Or
Yeah.
where you sort of come out of that and, how do we do that in a way that's positive? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'm at the point where I'm not too concerned about it, I guess. Like, I think, especially when I kind of first came out of that way of thinking, I felt self-conscious about interacting with evangelicals because as an evangelical prior, I would have been so, I guess, critical or judgmental of people with the wrong theology. And so I've let go of that. I've let go of the right theology, the correct doctrine kind of approach. But I know that that's kind of prevalent in the evangelical church. And so that would be a barrier for me interacting with evangelicals, knowing that, we think differently and they would view me as wrong. But I think now it's just, it's not occupying my brain anymore. So that's sort of removed a barrier in interacting with others, and I feel like that's a good thing. And because I don't believe there's necessarily correct doctrine about a lot of different things, I feel like there can be lots of different churches that can speak to lots of different people in different ways, and that's great. That's fine. As opposed to thinking, this church is doing it right and this one's doing it wrong.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I mean, like I say, hey, if the way that you understand God, that is, if the way the evangelical church understands God is working for them, and I mean, again, none of us doing it perfectly, hey, that's great. And I feel your sort of angst, or the angst you used to have, or whatever, sort of relating to evangelicals feeling like, well, maybe they feel like we have it wrong, kind of thing, or...
Well, because I was in that us versus them mentality for so long, I'm cognizant of it coming at me from the other side,
Sure.
And if you're cognizant of that, that's going to make you feel uncomfortable, or at least
Yes.
It's going to be distracting when you're trying to interact with people. But I feel like I'm doing better at just kind of letting that go.
Yeah. No. Good. No, I mean, I feel like I'm working on that, right? And I want to think of evangelicalism and interact with people in evangelicalism with a peace and a gentleness and a graciousness, and not beat my head against the wall that people see things differently, or that I'm going to be unable to convince them, right? That you don't need to see things that way or whatever. I was recently talking to my sister about this, and her son, my nephew, is in college in Texas, and he's sort of like, how do I respond to this? Because we've talked about some of these things, and I think, hey, one, just approach people gently with right.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be convinced because you won the argument. So approach people gently and great, and two, don't be threatened by that they see things differently or that they think you're wrong. That's
right.
That's okay. I mean,
it's okay. Yeah.
Everybody's doing their best. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, shoot, I think about me as a 20-something-year-old. I would have thought me today is he's fallen down the slippery slope and he's lost, or he's and then I'd have to have the argument in my brain. Was he ever saved, or did he lose his salvation?
Right.
Which one is it? But yeah, definitely have let go of all that.
Yeah. No.
Every Christian is somebody's heretic, right? Like Martin Luther was a heretic in 1500s, and everybody is a little right of somebody else or a little left of somebody else. The most conservative Christian I know, there's more conservative Christians than them who think they're wrong, and just it goes on and on.
Right. And I mean, for me, I think this is why I think if there's anything we've got to get rid of, or anything the Church Universal has got to get rid of, it's the idea of hell, that God is going to punish. Right? If we didn't have to fear hell, then we wouldn't have to fear being wrong. or that fear that somebody else is wrong, or call somebody else a heretic. Like, all we're trying to do is just get through life in a positive way. If somebody else sees it differently, if I don't have to fear that I'm going to hell or they're going to hell, then let's just get along and we can learn together, kind of thing.
Well, I remember as a Catholic too, there's purgatory, right? So there's not just heaven and hell, there's the middle, there's purgatory.
Right.
And I remember, I probably didn't even understand purgatory theologically correctly, but I just remember thinking, I don't think I'm good enough to make it to heaven. I think I can get to purgatory. I wonder how long I'm gonna have to be in purgatory, If I do these things wrong, is that like 1,000 years? Am I there for 1,000? Like what's...
I mean, it is so crazy.
Yeah.
Like, that goes through your head as a kid.
As a kid.
Right. And I mean, I remember that, like, surely this is not what God wants.
Yeah.
For us, our kids, what we're teaching them is making them feel like this.
I remember mortal sins, and again, probably didn't understand them right, but those were like, you commit one of those, and I think there's no getting into heaven, And like, so I remember thinking, like, did I do any of those? Man, that would...
Shoot.
If I did, I guess I might as well just, have fun, because I'm already...
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up
well, you get that question of, well, like, if there's no hell, then what's going to motivate you to be good,
Yes.
Aren't we just, isn't this going to be anarchy, and we're all just going to be living for ourselves? And
Right.
And I've heard you've answered that one in previous episodes, I think.
Yes. Well, I mean, I just think that's, I mean, to anybody, do whatever you want to do. If you want to go down the road of hedonistic self-gratification, see where it takes you.
Yeah.
Give it a whirl, kind of thing. I don't sort of follow the self-sacrificial way of Jesus, because if I don't, God's going to condemn me for all eternity. Yeah. I follow the self-sacrificial way of Jesus, trying to love myself and then try to love others, and because I find that that's where life is best.
Yeah.
And we know scientifically, we've studied what gives us the most happiness and health in the world is good, positive relationships. So if you think life is going to be found in, just the pursuit of your own selfish self-interest,
give it a shot.
Give it a shot. It's not going to lead you where you think it's going to lead you.
Isn't that Solomon, right? Isn't that?
Yes.
He had all the money and all the concubines and whatever else. And
right?
Didn't lead him to happiness.
It was all meaningless.
All meaningless, yeah. Okay,
well, that's good.
What else did we...
I think second time around we nailed it. Oh, this was good.
I don't know what, I don't know what we got here.
No, but
if anybody's going to find it interesting, but...
No, I think how we better ourselves and better the world is in part just through conversations like this, thinking about these things and wrestling through them, and I think that's a good thing. So, Yep, you're a good man.
Cool, thanks. You are too.
Well, that's it. That's episode 20. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'd love to hear what you think, or Josh would love to hear what you think. Shoot me a note or shoot me a note that I can pass along to Josh, Jeff at occhurch.org. And we will see you sometime in May.